Okay, so I'm on again with James from C-Level Operations APAC, and in our series on project management. It's just kind of, yeah, so welcome back, James.
Thanks, Wim. It's been fun catching up with you and being able to talk about projects and what we can do to improve it and getting greater awareness of the challenges that we have. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, we've done a few videos, and just going into our just prep before this video, I'm like, oh, we're kind of done, but then we started brainstorming. We've got like, hey, here's another 5 videos we could do. There's a lot on project management. So before we get into shutting down projects, like how do you transition them well to service and some of the billing issues and such, we realize it's important to talk about how we communicate with clients and our team around projects. Huge, because we can obviously lose clients and projects and our reputation by just simply not communicating well. So we're going to dive into that today.
It's a very common problem, and it's one of those issues again that because the way that we built our project teams on the back of the high level techs focusing on the project delivery itself, we just focus on getting the work done. And as we generally know in our MSPs, most of the client perception, nearly all the client perception, is not around what we do technically. It's how we interact with them, and they know it's under control. So it's really important as we go through this conversation today is really think about, like, what are your clients thinking and what do they need? Because one of the things that always, when I'm talking to prospects and I'm talking to my clients and coaching through them, we make a lot of assumptions about what our clients want, what they perceive, what they expect, and very few people actually go and talk to them and ask. So throughout this conversation, we're going to throw out a lot of ideas, but you really need to understand your client base, what they actually need from you, and talk to them about it and collaborate on improving the process. They're going to feel a lot better knowing that you're trying to work and improve if you're bringing them in to provide feedback as well. So let's dive in. Like, this is a big topic. We can probably talk hours and hours and hours on this.
Yeah.
This is so let's start with the really simple thought process around what the main problem really is with communication. And it's really because we've got no standards rolled out. It's all just assumed knowledge. We just assume whoever we put in projects is either going to manage it like yourself as the owner, because you had your methodology and they're just going to copy that, or you're going to assume they know all the project methodology and that you're bringing them in to fix all of this and they just know all the right things. They may well do. They probably won't. So starting at the standards and looking at what the expectations are through the whole project communication space. I think the first place that I always start with in asking a question when I'm coaching a client is, what size projects do you actually deliver on typically? Because that really frames up the answers to what you need to do next. Because we have that, like everything we do in MSPs, we always aim for perfection. So if we can't get perfection, we do nothing. It's the all or nothing approach. Is that what you typically see as well, Wim?
Yeah, I see it in different places. There's an all or nothing, and it could be just like an SOP. They're like, oh, a couple steps don't apply, or a couple steps are out of date, and they throw out the whole thing, and they're doing it from memory or assumptions. Like, no, let's go look at it and say, hey, maybe this doesn't apply, but the rest is still good. But throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But yeah, when you mentioned like the size of the client, what came to mind right away is like, hey, what if it's a variety of clients that maybe the standard works for big projects over 100+ hours, but yeah, we got this 20-hour project and let's bypass all of that. It's too much. It's not in the budget. We don't have the time. And now there's no standards and the client's not being communicated with and the ball gets dropped. So we have that challenge. There's a mix of project types and technologies and sizes and budgets and such. So how do you adapt to that? How do you coach, let's say, me through that?
So what I do then is we would start by understanding what exactly what you said. What types do we deliver and what sort of size are we delivering? It's much different to it. It's a big difference between delivering a 20-hour project and a 400-hour project that you're expecting to go over
Yeah.
months. So breaking it down of what the expectations are for those types and feeding in we spoke about that conversion into from sales to project handoff in previous videos, but having it documented from that point of what the expectations are, because not only are we setting it internally, but then we're going to set it with the client because the account manager or the salesperson is also aware of what the expectations through the project are. So when they're selling the project, they can say, this is how we communicate, this is how we manage these types of things. And the client has had their expectations set from the outset. So being able to break it down, typically I just look at it as a small, medium, large project and just making that fit into what your typical sizes are. If you're doing a lot that your small is 100 hours, that's your small, that's fine. And you might have like a 2 to 300, you might have a 400. And that sort of scales down whatever you're doing. And obviously, the larger the project, the more communication that needs to happen. So starting from, I always find what's important is not to start from the big end of town, because that I find, again, it goes back to that all or nothing approach of, we've got to do it all, and then we need to force feed that into the medium and small, where actually I reframe it and go, well, what would be an expectation for your small? And for our sort of example, let's just say it's a 10 to 20 hour project, just for simplicity. In a 10 to 20 hour project, realistically, how many touch points should there be for communication? I would consider introduction to the project manager after it's been handed off from sales, just to set the expectation. Hi, I'm the project manager. These are the next steps. You need to make sure you pay the money. We're going to order that, and I'll be in touch once all of that's done again. And then you'd probably do a kickoff, confirm all the details, update them if there's any issues during the project, because you shouldn't need to, for such a small project, it should just be, we've booked it in, we've got it done, we complete. And at that end of the sign off. Not too difficult, is it? At the small end.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I was looking at a proposal that I reviewed, approved that my project manager was doing the other day. It's just an IT assessment, like 25 hours for a new client, so something like that. And he's kind of handling the sales side and the project management, so we wouldn't have that introduction. But he definitely would introduce, a technician would be doing the work. So yeah, introduce the tech there, hand off, kick it off, update as we go along, and then deliver the results. We put that language right into the proposal, what to expect on those communication points as a bullet point. It's part of the scope of work. Like, we're billing them for that time. So put it right in there, in and around or kind of bookending, I guess, the actual work we're doing with log in their servers and their firewalls and check stuff out. That's the bookend. So yeah, so those become tickets in the project, doing the kickoff, and then doing the completion handoff call presentation.
And it's so important to get that end-to-end integration piece, like being able to show that we're doing it on our proposal. Like in the small MSPs, often it will be the person that's doing the pre-sales, engineering, managing it, even delivering it. So again, we can reduce the touch points that are needed by just thinking about what does the client need to know and what details can we get. So even the kickoff call, a lot of the time in these smaller projects, if you do it well, like you were saying in the proposal and getting the scoping done, you probably don't need to confirm a whole lot after that. You'd just be, you've paid, we're ready to go, here's some key dates, we'll be in touch. So doesn't need to be rigorous. And that starts to come into what methods are we communicating via too, because often when I talk to people, it doesn't matter what size project, they usually go send people to site to have the kickoff calls and the ongoing communications, because I think it ends up being they don't trust the system, so they need to put someone in front of the client to sort of smooth everything over all the time. And how that's such a waste of resourcing and time, especially for these smaller projects. Um, we've just got to look at the methods. So from my perspective, when we were doing small projects, all I ever did was have the guy that was managing the projects. They'd do the first initial phone call to say introductions and what we're doing, confirm some dates, and then would only call if there was an issue past that point. And if it was appropriate to send a progress update, which most of the time it wasn't, because again, we're only talking like 20 hours, it should just be booked in and done. We shouldn't have to talk to them. We should be able to come at the end and say, hey, we've done, let's confirm that you're happy, and then sign it off in whatever method that we choose. And we'll talk about that in a bit more. But the reason why we end up having to feel like we do need to do more communication in between is because we really don't manage the projects well. If with all the stuff that we've been talking about so far in our video series, if all of that is done well or good enough, you don't actually have to communicate as much as you think you do, because we're just flowing through our process. We're just getting the job done. Typically, our clients just want to make sure it's being managed, they're not being interrupted, and that the job gets done. Like that might not be for every particular client, but the majority, from my experience, that's what their expectations are. So
Yeah.
your ongoing communication can be a lot less in that sort of small. The medium's where it's getting interesting. Let's just say it's like a 40 to 80 hour project for this sort of example.
Just coming back to the small project, like I've seen navigators of clients agreed that this project has value, it's 20 hours. And then we're hung up on something technology, like another project has to be done first. And the client may not be aware of that, but it's like, oh, it's waiting on our list for something else to get done. So we know what's going on. My team, I'm like, well, have you told them that? No. So they got a meeting with the client for high level check-in, and they're like, where's that project that you sold me? Like, why is it not done? Like, are you guys too busy? Do we need to go somewhere else? So I'm like, oh, them digging into the guy just waiting on something, we haven't communicated it. So that's because some of these things, they just might take 3 to 6 months to get to, and that's okay. But we do got to communicate why that is.
That's a good point. The dependencies, and I think that comes to the standards. What do we need to look at? What do we need to communicate? That we're going back to that assumed knowledge. We assume our team will contact them because it's pretty obvious they need to do this project before they do that project, but they don't think about it from the client's perspective. And I think a lot of that is the lack of clarity on who's actually responsible for owning what piece in this process as well.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about your team, and the person managing the project might be the same person as selling it. So sometimes that works really well because they're already talking to the clients, they already know where the project's up, and so that muscle memory type communication, and that might work well. As soon as you start scaling up past a couple of people, especially when you've got a specific account manager, you've got people that do the pre-sales, you do people who deliver it, and you might have a non-technical project manager. There's a lot of people in that process then. So really clearly delineating who's responsible for what when in this communication flow, then firstly they know they should be doing it, because they're not the project manager isn't assuming the account manager is keeping the client up to date, and vice versa. That, you know, generally I'd recommend the account manager does all the sales. They're only brought in if there's out of scope or if there's a big massive problem that they need to smooth over. Otherwise, that's why we've got a project manager there to manage the communication. I come across a lot of people that want the account manager to be like the full sole point of contact. But yeah, I can sort of understand it in some ways.
Like, burn the account manager out if they got to do everything, if they're selling and quoting and PM and quoting and communicating all these things, and it slows it down. Like I've seen that, you're burning those people out.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. And another thing is what you're doing as well is setting it up so the client actually only has one person that they really know in the business, and you've got a business risk then of what happens if that person leaves and goes to your competitor down the road. Um, so on top of the burnout or that they're just so busy that they can't communicate well enough, um, we need to create depth in our team that the clients know that they've got multiple people in your business that they're talking to and they're all doing good things. And that's how you build better, stickier relationships with the clients
Hmm.
ongoing. And especially when you're looking at projects and we may be doing a project for a new client. Like this might be new client onboarding. If you don't have your communication done well in this onboarding, how well does that set the expectations up and the perceptions of these new clients that are coming in that have you've fought hard to get someone to sign up, and then all of a sudden they're getting a bad experience from this onboarding because we're not managing the project right. And that's all communication. Like as long as they're being supported in the technology, they don't really care. It's that building. This is our opportunity to build that relationship in the first 3 months of that engagement, and they will remember that.
Yeah, that's the delivering on the promises we set in the marketing and the sales and that and proposal. Because they're like, okay, believe in it. What we're gonna do this. But then every day, the first day of the project, the first week, that's all key to communicating and following through and delivering on the promises. Yeah, under promise, over deliver all the way through.
Very, very much so. And
Yeah.
that goes back to we've been talking about the repeatability in our work plans and our systems and processes throughout, but they could be perfect. But if we're not really communicating and engaging with the client through these projects, um, it can leave a bad taste in the mouth, even if it's not a bad enough experience for them to question why am I here. You start to question, well, the professionalism of the MSP, do they really value our engagement? And I think that's something a lot of MSPs forget about is, especially when you have a team of project people that just do projects all the time, it's no big deal anymore. Where for that client, it actually is a big deal.
Mm.
Yeah, you just see, even a 20-hour project is going to be many thousands of dollars. It's a big deal to the client that they're paying that much. They don't go through these projects very often, and we neglect to think from the perspective of the client in that fashion. And this is where the communication components become really important. And even for the small one, I mentioned we shouldn't need to do a lot of the communication as we're doing the work. It should only be PM picking up the phone if we need to, if there's an issue that they need to be aware of. Important part of some of these projects is that to the end users themselves as well. So um, pick Office 365 example. It might be a smaller client. It might only be a 20-hour project. At a high level, we can book in the dates. We can communicate to that key contact. But often in small businesses, they're really poor at communicating internally. So one of the little tricks I used to do was use broadcast emails to the end users to say where we're up to. So we might be a week out from when we're going to do migration. So we'd send an email from our templated library that we do to say in 7 days we're going to convert over your email to Office 365. This is what it's going to do for you. This is the impacts it's going to have. And then about 3 days out, back in the day, we used to send them out their temporary passwords and end user guides so they can set up their own stuff and get prepared. Day before, remind them that tomorrow morning we're doing the cutover, so there's going to be email issues. Email on that morning, email them and say, we're about to start, be prepared, finish off all your work. At this time, it's not going to be working. And then at the end of it, we would send them an email to say, it's all been cut over. If you've still got issues, please contact us. And not only did that give a good client experience that they felt like they were part of it, but also reduced our help desk calls dramatically for those kinds of things, because we just found that people internally were really bad at communicating. The key contact would know like where it's up to, what was happening, but they wouldn't actually broadcast it out to their staff. And those emails, we used to do it in Campaign Monitor. You could just build it all out and automate it to go out at a certain time and a certain day. So part of the initial project management planning could just have that all ready to go. And it wasn't too much work.
Campaign Monitor actually works well for that. Like I haven't played with it, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I found it worked really well. We were still back in the day where we didn't have API connection with ConnectWise. We used to just export our CSV out, import it back in, so we've got the list and can create custom fields. So our passwords for the Office 3, temporary passwords for the Office 365 accounts were just a field in our CSV, and then it was all just variables inside the email to present that to the end users. And it worked really well.
Oh, that just reminds me, I'm reading this book from Michael Michalowicz. You may have heard of him. He got some books on like the Pumpkin Plan, Profit First, Clockwork, etc. This one is called Fix This Next. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. Like what to fix next in your business. And we had a case study around a company that sold phone systems for like large sports centers, where you got hundreds of, or whatever, I'd say 100 plus phones. And they would have all these follow-up calls afterwards because they did a good job selling it. They go deploy it and people don't know how to use it. Tons of follow-up calls. So they changed it. So they bring in the client into their office to do training. So it saves them from going on site. The whole deployment is easier. And then it just almost eliminated all the follow-up calls. People were trained, knew what to expect. The relationship was there, the rapport, and so much better experience for the client.
And it's more cost effective and profitable for the people delivering the projects as well.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a very good point. So the other thing, like I mentioned those sort of templates, and I mentioned standards. So even on these small projects, when it's just the introduction call, the kickoff call, and the close call, all of those should have a template of what we want to communicate to, and that could be many different ways. Typically I'd recommend, like what you said, is have in the work plan, in our phases, that there would be these as tickets so that we make sure they get done. This is where we can use the standard notes, have a already pre-built out template. So we might just make it that we'll pick up the phone or we'll jump on a Teams call. And then after that, we'll send out our notes from that call to reiterate it. And then we've got the record inside our PSA to make it super simple. If we use our standard notes, we can already build that out. There's a few details to change for that particular project, and we're done. Again, making this process smooth, but also repeatable, because everyone's going to do it differently. And maybe if you've got the one project manager that does it and it's going to be with you a long time, that's great. They'll know their sort of way of doing it. But what happens if they move on? What happens if you add someone else that needs to fit into this process? What if you actually give them a holiday and there's still projects to manage? That repeatability is really important in the communications. And that's each and every step. The thing about, I'll just jump to the client sign-off. I think it's important to touch on while we're still focusing on the smaller communication pieces for a smaller project.
And I'll get to the bigger projects, but that's okay.
You can build out the middle for as you get larger. What it becomes is having clearer expectations of when do we contact them? Do we do it as a regular weekly update for the project? Is it based on milestones? And typically on the medium projects, I'd stick to milestones because it's clearer. We can map that out, like you said, on the proposals as well. Here are the key milestones that will provide this contact and this update, and then we'll contact if there's any issues. In larger ones that have more moving pieces, have a lot more hours going over a lot longer, there needs to be a more regular rhythm because things can blow out a lot quicker, that we want to catch those little issues. And though all of those meetings need to have an agenda. We need to know what we're going in to do, what we're presenting to the client, what we need to know, so that we've got clear action points that we can do those catch-ups as efficiently as possible. And that's just how you scale it up as you go to larger projects. And then it fits into the client sign-off. And one of the important part with the client sign-off is, are we actually getting them to sign it off? Or are we just coming to them and saying, yes, we're done? And they've got no opportunity to say, oh, we're not really done. That's an important mechanism, important procedure. And we'll talk about the closing projects in a future one, but the person communicating needs to know what should actually happen from this meeting. And it's a big difference from saying we need to get a client to physically sign something off, as compared to us just updating and saying, yep, we've achieved your scope, we're done. It'll fall over to support. And there's no right answer. These ones are just, we need to make a decision what our procedure and policies inside our MSP, and then just make sure it's repeatable. And again, that decision might scale up based on the size of project as well. Like I see people that for those smaller 20-hour projects, there's no sign off. We just do it and we say we're done. Whereas a 400-hour project probably needs something more formal, especially if you're waiting to get paid.
Yeah, we haven't had that issue because we do everything 100% upfront and retainers and such, but we still need to make sure the client's happy and we're handing off well. So that's key to getting more, because maybe we got the money, but they're not happy and they're not going to do another project. So we still have to manage the expectations and perceptions, regardless of the billing structure. Yeah.
I think it's important, again, regardless of the billing structure, there's an opportunity to get some learnings out of the project by talking to the client at the end. Whether it's a formal sign-off or whether it's a casual catch-up on Zoom like we're doing now, Wim, of we're done, did you have any feedback from it? Are there any potential lingering issues that we aren't aware of? And what did you feel about the experience as we did it? You've got a brief window where people will engage with that before they've moved on and have completely forgotten that you did a project for them. So there's a really good opportunity to gain valuable feedback, but also keep building the client relationship. I think the touch point, as MSPs, we always forget about the opportunities for touch points with clients. And in general, the MSP touch points aren't actually that enjoyable for clients because they've got something broken. It's very transactional. And like I mentioned earlier, the projects being a big deal for the client, let's treat it like that as well and give them an opportunity to feel like they've been a part of it and that they've actually gotten something out of the project, not that it's just a normal boring changeover of technology and it's back to business as usual.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to resell them so that they see the value and that it was worth paying the whatever $1,000 on it. They're not just left with the bill and it's done, but it's they realize they're more efficient, more secure, or whatever it might be. So yeah.
And that goes back to the scoping conversation we had a while ago and being able to have a purpose statement. Being able to reiterate this is what we set out to achieve and we actually achieved it. Now look at it. It's a good opportunity more than anything.
So yeah, what we do with the larger projects along the way is basically use like a sprint approach with which comes from the Scrum methodology, Agile methodology from software development, but applying that to the projects is we're going to meet every week or every other week or a month, whatever time frame is appropriate, review what happened in the last sprint, figure out the priorities for the next one, make sure that's achievable and realistic, and then get to work on it. and then we're just repeating that routine. So it's less waterfall, big style projects. It's just ongoing flow of work. That seems to work well for engineers and the client and everybody. So we're not talking about stuff happening in 6 months, but what's important this month to move it forward, and what's the budget for it, and keep going. So that's worked well for us. Just lean, agile, reduce what we have to think about.
Right. I think I'd agree with that as well. Whatever frequency you end up working to, whether you need to do it weekly or fortnightly or monthly for these sort of projects, I wouldn't leave it any longer than monthly on large projects.
No.
But that review and reflection of what have we done, have we achieved it, what's next? That's the consistent agenda, and not trying to plan the whole project out entirely and just keep working to that long term. Like, you want to work to the long term plan, but communicating to the 6 months out, like you said, provides no value to anyone. No one's really thinking like that. It's, what are the roadblocks now? What are the changes that are happening now? We'll get those done, and then what's next? And then what's next? Because that's where I find a lot of the time these larger projects just get really stuck, is the focus is on a huge big picture, and no one's actually stopping to go, well, what are my actual next actions? And they stall, especially when you have multiple stakeholders from the client, you have multiple stakeholders through third-party vendors and that as well. We just get stuck, and no one's really taking ownership. So having that structure that you're talking about, Wim, gives that continued repeatability with our communication over and over again that we're controlling.
Yep.
And that control really makes a difference in getting the job done, but also making the client feel like it's been a valuable experience to have you as the people delivering the project.
I learned a ton going through this with you. Realize there's a bunch of things we can improve in our process and the templates and scaling that out in our MSP teams. I think you kind of touched on that, but what sunk home for me most from this conversation, James, was our tendency, or technicians at tendency, we're all about the work, doing the technology, building stuff, migrating, designing, making it amazing. And we all think we're doing a good job, but the client's like, what have you done for me? And that's the perception, and the communication coming in is, we're all thinking about the quality of the work and the security, and we don't want you making sure your servers are backed up and you're not getting hacked, and putting all those things in place. But their perception is around how we interact, that experience. That's what they're left with. So we're building castles and everything, and they're like, how are you treating me? Am I confident? That's what they're left with, is the emotional side, not the logical side and technology.
Yeah, I think for my wrap up, last thought is, outside of the client experience stuff, which I think's the most important component of all of this, is turning that client experience into a repeatable process, and with all those components that we spoke about today, well defined. So we're doing the same things every time, and we're efficient and effective at it. That's how we keep the communication up with clients as well. If it's left too vague, we're always going to default to our normal behaviors, where if we've defined it, it's easy to do through our systems as well, then people are going to do it, and it's going to be a successful process. So our time just flew by today.
Yeah, we'll have to cut it off there, and we got a list of things for next time before moving to finishing a project well. Look forward to that one. But yeah, some other things to get into with dependencies, backlog grooming, out of scope work, billing, lots there. So thanks for tuning in, and share this with other people that could benefit from this. So post in the comments, like, subscribe, all those wonderful things that you're supposed to stay at the end of the video. Appreciate the engagement and the shares we've gotten there. So I'll see you next time. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Wim. Catch you next time.
Yep. All right.